terrible debate. It's terrible debate in between you and drinks, but there's luckily one more panel after us, so we're not in that awful position. My name is Meena Seetharaman, and I am the Global Director of Content Strategy at the Economist Group in the media businesses. And I am joined by a fantastic panel today, and we're going to talk about the evolving roles of data, trust, and transparency as related to advertising and publishing. With the advent of native advertising, with more and more brands moving into the content space and using similar formats to what publishers use to get you news and information every single day, there is understandably, I think, some confusion for readers, and we worry a little bit about making sure that we can make our roles transparent to them, but also make the experience a worthwhile one to them. So that's what we'll be talking about today. But before we dive in, I would love for each one of you to introduce yourselves to the audience that we have with us today.
Sure, I'm Amanda Rubin. I work at Goldman Sachs, and I'm one of the global heads of their brand and content strategy group.
Hi, I'm Tonya Reese. I work at Economist, which is the communications marketing firm, and I look after intellectual property, which includes the trust barometer and other studies that we do over the course of the year.
Hi everyone, I'm Barbara Bassney. I'm the Vice President of Global Brand Content and Media at Xerox.
Hi, I'm Mary Gail Pesamenti, and I'm VP of Content Creation for the Partner Studios by AOL and Huffington Post.
So I was actually really excited that we're an all-female panel following another all-female panel today here at Social Media Week, so rock on. We were also pretty excited, actually, that it's probably one of the few panels that you'll see here where there isn't necessarily consumer brand represented directly. And I think that that sort of speaks to a trend of how in the B2B space, the same tactics, tools, ideas still apply. So hopefully, whether you work for a consumer brand or a B2B brand, you'll actually find what we talk about today helpful. But Tonya, I actually wanted to start with you, specifically around the trust barometer. I know Edelman's been doing this for 16 years, and I think there are some interesting trends that have come out, and I thought that could set the stage really well for how we want to talk about what's happening right now in publishing.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, the Trust Barometer, as Meena says, is a global survey that we've been doing for 16 years. This year we surveyed 33,000 people in 28 countries around the world, and it was initially designed to measure trust in institutions, or institutions of government, media, business, and NGOs in those different markets. And now we look at all kinds of things across industry sectors, media trends, and other things that what are the things that influence and drive trust and engagement. And over the course of time, we really saw clearly a number of important trends, and one of them that I think is so relevant today is the changing media landscape, the rise of peers and friends and families as influencers. And so we initially had started the survey by looking at primarily a group that we call the informed public, or the opinion elites, the influencers who are better educated, higher income, they over-index on consuming traditional media. But as we saw the peer voice becoming more important, we broadened out the sample 5 years ago to include the general population. And so now we have 5 years of trending data on that as well. And what we saw this year, and the findings just came out a few weeks ago, they were released at Davos at the World Economic Forum, was a really remarkable trend, which is an increasing inequality in trust between the people who are that informed public, about 15% of the sample, and everyone else, to where the informed public has seen trust increase, they're feeling good, they are at a trust score of 60, compared to, for the other 85%, are at a trust score of 45, which puts them into what we call distrust or territory, right? And there's obviously a lot of nuances by market, but we were really taken aback by that disparity, and it's incredibly important for all of us to think about as media people, marketers, communicators, because what we're essentially seeing is a separation between those who still have authority but no longer necessarily have influence, right? right? Because what we've seen is the inversion of that traditional pyramid of influence, right? We all remember the textbooks with you've got authority and influence concentrated at the top of the pyramid, and then it kind of trickles down, and we influence everyone else, and they kind of trust us to look after them, and they also believe that they can climb the ladder themselves. Well, that doesn't work anymore, right? Because now they have social media, and we have search, and we have all kinds of ways, peer reviews, all kinds of ways that information has been democratized and gets shared in ways that we don't necessarily directly influence anymore. And so it creates a real challenge for us as communicators. How do you influence when you no longer necessarily control that conversation? And trust is a part of, we believe, bridging that gap, but it's challenging.
What I find really interesting about that in particular is, so you see that inversion happening, but there are two characteristics also that rise to the top in terms of, I think there may be 5 of them in particular that come up in the trust barometer, but 2 that I think are particularly relevant if you're a publisher and an advertiser. And the first is integrity, right? That's a big deal. And then that idea of integrity is pretty critical, but the challenge for us as we innovate in the publishing world is that we're sort of feeding into this lack of trust within our audiences, or we have to be incredibly careful about not creating that lack of trust. And so I actually wanted to pull the rest of the panel into the conversation, in particular Barbara and Amanda, because both your brands are using content to advance a brand narrative, to do a lot of things. They play a very specific role, but I'm wondering how you do that and maintain transparency, both with the readerships that you get to through your media partners, but also how that conversation happens with your media partners and how you make sure that you feel that the conversation is clear and transparent to the audience that you're trying to reach.
Yeah, so I'll chime in on this one. You know, in order to have a successful partnership with the publisher and to accomplish the objectives that I want as an advertiser, and to do that with content effectively, I think first and foremost, there's got to be sort of this uber brand respect, if you will, for why you're choosing that publishing partner, what they represent to their readership. I don't want to compromise that, because actually if I do, it's going to come back and hurt our brand. And so I was saying to Mina before the session, I mean, there's a list of, as publishers and advertisers have been at this for the last 3 or so years, 4 years, there are some really prestigious publishers and really prestigious brands that have partnered on things and kind of done it without thinking about what they stand for, who their audience is of that publisher, making sure you're being respectful of what that audience is looking for, and they both have ended up with egg on their face. So as you enter into this sort of marriage with the publisher, when you create this content, you want it to be right for your brand, you want it to be right for their brand and their audience, and if you really approach it, I think, from that duality, you're going to be a lot more successful with your initiatives.
I would completely agree with Barbara. Look, I think that what's really interesting is that it is in both the brand's and a publisher's best interest to create something valuable for that audience. You know, we've worked with a lot of different publishers. I think each publisher brings something very interesting and different to the table. But at the end of the day, I'm not interested in creating non-transparent, and I don't even want to get into the transparency discussion because I think that conversation has been had, and I don't know a brand that's interested in not being transparent because I don't think it's good for anyone. I think it's not I would agree, but I think what's happening in whether you call it native advertising partnerships is it's an opportunity for media companies and brands to collaborate in a way that they've never collaborated before. And what I mean by that is, I think the media entities are offering things that they've never offered before, and brands are doing things that we've never done before. I mean, we're creating content like we never did before. They have data on audience consumption that was never available before. So I think it's a really valuable marriage. And you know, to Barbara's point, if it's done in the right way, I think it's a win-win for everyone.
So I would agree with that. I don't, at least very few of the brands that I've worked with are sort of intentionally interested in misleading the reader. But I think with all things new, this tends to happen. I bet, decades ago when the first editorial came out in a magazine, people were all panicked and up in arms about that as well. And now it's, the advertisement feature, advertorial is printed across the top, and there's a vernacular for that and a way of mapping that in your head cognitively to what that is. But I think that one of the things that's challenging, and I don't know if you guys agree with me, but the content environment is incredibly noisy right now. And there's a panel later this week about whether we're choosing ignorance because of that, because we personalize everything down to what we're interested in. But like HuffPo, I think, is a great example. It's a general interest online magazine, right? So you can, on the same page, see an article about President Obama, Kim Kardashian's behind, and then a piece of branded content. All of those things might appeal to me, not her butt so much, but they might all appeal to me as a reader. But how do you help brands to navigate that, to help them kind of rise above that noise and get noticed without it feeling sort of intrusive to a particular brand, or to the reader rather, sorry.
We cover a lot of different topics, obviously, but I was happy to hear the words marriage in terms of, transparency and authenticity are, so important to us. And just back to transparency for a second, it was interesting, there were FTC guidelines that just came out recently about native, and they must have used the word deception or deceptive 20 times in the guidelines.
Yeah.
So we all are being authentic, transparent, but I think just truth be told, there are a lot of, either publishers and brands, as you said, who are, mismatched. And when that happens, that's tough for all of us, because we're trying to operate up here and really do it the right way, but we're challenged with that. So having in both transparency, authenticity is good, and also the right marriage, the right fit. So we cover a lot of different topics, but there are certain topics that we're incredibly passionate about that are very forward on the site. For example, Ariana, about a year and a half ago, sort of made a statement about solutions-based journalism around what's working. So let's not just, as she said, have an article that leads. Let's talk about the problem and then offer a solution. And that is, in the beginning when we first started doing that was in certain parts of the site, and now it's starting to infuse a lot of the journalism. That's one thing. The second thing is that there's a big focus on impact, social responsibility, and that's an incredibly important topic again across the site. There was a Thrive movement of Huffington Post where there's more wellness and mindfulness content. So those particular areas, those two sort of large, broad buckets are areas in which we feel is a really good, authentic, transparent place for brands to connect with us.
We have a terrific partnership with the Huffington Post with regards to this work, where we highlight our small business initiative. And one of the things that I think is an opportunity that never presented itself before in this new media landscape is brands have an opportunity to add their voice on topics that they can be credible and substantive. That opportunity didn't exist a couple of years ago, right? So I actually think, and I do think the opportunity that we've cultivated with the HuffPost on this particular topic is a great demonstration of that, right? We can add thought leadership to a topic that may not be, doesn't promote any of our products and services, but it's something that we feel we can have a substantial voice in. And I think that's an opportunity that revealed itself recently that didn't otherwise exist.
Just underline what Amanda just said, which is that the research that we've been doing shows that is so true. That over the years, in the last 5 years, the trust in owned media, right, or corporate media, we define it for people as being media that a company produces and publishes on its own website, channels, and so on, has increased by 5 points in the last 5 years. To where it's now trusted by half globally and more in some countries and among some demographics. And if you look at content creators, right, and who are trusted content creators on social media, on online-only sites, and so on, friends and family, number one, right? Academic experts is second. Third is companies that I use or have a relationship with, right? So there's clearly an opportunity as people have become more comfortable with search engines, social media, and filtering through content and making their own decisions about credibility and who the authors are, they absolutely want to hear from brands, right? Brands have a license to be part of the conversation.
But I think Amanda's point was key, which is you have to have a right to play, right? So if you're a brand that is trying to have an opinion on a topic where you really don't have any expertise, I think that's a challenge. That's a pretty significant barrier to entry. And you never want a piece of content, I would think, where somebody reads it and says, like, why would I listen to enter a brand's name here on this particular topic? But I thought, Tonya, your point was interesting because I do actually think that people are starting to develop a code for unpacking the complexity around this stuff. And I think part of it is that it's new and it's still a little bit like the Wild West. Like, Barbara and I talked about this. We're all still experimenting and figuring out what works. And the key is to know your audience and figure out what will work for them specifically. So what I might do, for an audience on Economist.com might not work at all for somebody on HuffPo, and that's totally fine. And a brand would engage us for different things. But I'm actually wondering if you found that if there's any generational split between like what millennials are finding. So I've read statistics out of the UK, for example. Of course, I've read statistics out of the UK, where like almost 60% of millennials would click on a piece of sponsored content if they thought the content was worth reading, right? And we have our own research that isn't necessarily millennial specific that says a similar thing. I'm wondering if your research
absolutely backs it up as well. So if you look at media trends globally across everyone, and then you just look at millennials only, the difference is millennials use more media, more often, more frequently, and they use all of it.
Yeah.
And so the gap, for the general population, at the top you have search engines and trust, and then it goes all the way down. The gap for general population is something like 20 points between the most trusted and the least trusted. For millennials, it's like 10 points.
Oh, that's right.
Because they're even more comfortable sort of jockeying through the different platforms and filtering themselves.
I think the other interesting thing to talk about is what does success look like?
Yes.
There was an article that came out this week about how BuzzFeed sort of was making a statement saying that age use and uniques are over.
Yeah.
And, that is one measure of engagement, but we find the more and more we work with brands that true engagement is more around, for example, commenting and sharing. If the audience is going to, that means they've really truly digested the content. If they're willing to share it with their peer group, that's a level of trust, authenticity, a showing of sort of shared values. And that can be much more important to certain brands and certain categories than something like viral. For example.
I personally like viral is a little bit of a myth, but that's a whole different panel for a different day. But I would tend to agree with you. I think that one of the things that we have to work hard at is setting the right metrics for our programs. Because sometimes it's dwell time and repeat visits that are actually more of a marker of success than how many people did I shove through an advertising code to get to this.
And I would just chime in and say it gets to the point you can't cookie cutter it. These programs are a lot of shared work for both sides. If you try to cookie cutter it, it's probably not going to turn out for you the way you'd hoped. So you typically have to start with this sort of clean slate. You look at who's the audience of that publisher. You look at what you're trying to accomplish with the initiative, and you start to bake it. And there's 1,000 different ways to put that cake together. So that's part of the fun of this. It's part of the challenge of it. And that customization, I think, is absolutely critical, which makes it challenging and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's simultaneously a painful time to be in this environment and an amazing time to be in this environment, which is kind of why I love it. I don't know exactly what that says about me, but I do think that it's really true. I think publishers are being squeezed a little bit, and Barbara, you and I talked about this, and Tonya, I think you and I had too, which is that banner advertising is not nearly as effective as it used to be. And I'm thinking a little bit along the lines of the engagement marker now in the trust barometer. And the studies have shown that people actually do engage more, whether it's by accident or not, I don't know, with native advertising and content marketing than they do with traditional banner advertising. But at the same time, we're seeing statistics like 62% of readers feel like they don't trust a news brand quite as much if they engage in native advertising. And so I think it's an interesting time for us to figure out how those pieces can work together. I'm also interested actually in, I know that both Xerox and Goldman Sachs have brought a lot of content creation in-house, and also in particular I'm thinking of the capital markets piece where you're using a piece that was a piece of content marketing and it now lives on your .com. I'm interested if you're seeing a difference in the reaction to content that is produced by the brand versus content that's produced by a media partner. Not purely in the distributing of it, but just in the actual creation of it.
Let me answer that two different ways. So I would say one of the things that we've been focused on, I think other brands have, brands as publishers, we're creating a lot of content in-house right now. But what I have said for a while is there's not one solve for everything, because I think that the holy grail is the right content on the right channel, in the right format, at the right time, delivered to the right person. So, that's infographics, that's videos, that's illustrations, that's the gamut. And we work with agency partners still. We work with media entities on these bespoke programs, and I completely agree with you, and I'm glad that was brought up. I think it's a really exciting time, but it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's a really hard time because, you can do so much more. You can be so much more targeted. You can be so much more specific. You can be so much more relevant, and, that's hard. But one of the things that we're doing that alleviates that a little bit is because we are creating content, we also work with publishers to syndicate that content. And so another way that we're working with publishers, aside from the bespoke content creation, is we're taking the content that we're creating and on certain themes that we want to align ourselves with from a thought leadership perspective, and we're collaborating with media entities to understand how to reimagine this content that's already been created, and then how to use their platform to distribute it. So when you talk about the New York Times, in certain instances, when we create content with media entities, they'll let us take it afterwards. Sometimes they won't. In this instance, they did. And I think from an engagement perspective, if someone finds it, they tend to spend the same amount of time. But in terms of the numbers that is pushed to that piece of content, I'm nowhere near what the New York Times,
Goldman Sachs.com doesn't have the same.
We just don't have the same numbers. So I think that it's, we're creating content. We're creating content with media partners, but we're also creating content with our agency partners. We're doing it all.
Barbara, is it working similarly for you?
Yeah, my point of view on this one, similar to Amanda, that we have our content factory that's going on inside the company, and we have content that we're creating with publishers. I think a key fuel to both of those veins being successful is creating content from an informed place. So don't do the navel gazing, oh, this is what I want to talk about. Make sure you do your homework. Make sure the content is right for the audience, right? It goes back to that very fundamental principle. It's going to make it more successful. And then what I think is the key is you want to make sure you have content that I want to milk it. So as I think about paid, owned, and earned media, my poem ecosystem, I want to make sure I have content that I can really leverage, because I'm trying to squeeze, 10 cents or 11 cents out of every dime. So I want to make it work hard. If it's really good content, it's going to give me a lot of permission to use it in a lot of ways, which is effective and smart ways of using limited budget dollars. It's a great use then of the partner time as well as our own people that are creating the content. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Mary Gail, I was wondering, as the other publisher here, do you think we're overthinking this whole discussion on native? So one thing that Tonya brought up actually in our earlier discussion was feels a little like it was inside baseball, which I don't know baseball, but I'll assume that's we're all talking to ourselves. And so I'm wondering if we're overthinking it a little bit, if it's just another thing that we'll have to deal with, and kind of like your position on that.
Well, I think we're overthinking it sometimes. Other times I think we're overthinking it.
Right.
We're not taking enough risk. So in terms of overthinking it, again, if there's, if you know your point about an investment in quality is a good one. I mean, it always pays off. In terms of true engagement and the lifespan of a piece of content can be much greater or better or more impactful, the better it is. So really an investment in quality never fails. And then if you are transparent, if you are authentic, if it is a good match, meaning you're not trying to force it, you know, I think the overthinking comes in when you're really trying to force it. I mean, there are times when a brand will come to us with a certain idea or avenue that they want to go down, and at times we will say, I'm sorry, but this just really is not a good fit, it's not going to work. Eyes go wide, what do you mean? You know, but so I think keep it simple. Transparency, authenticity, quality, a good fit, it's going to work. In terms of underthinking it, we've had some experience in terms of working with certain brands. We had a program with Chipotle called Food for Thought, which was about sustainable food. We have a program right now with Sleep Number around saying, you know, they're taking a stand and saying, you know, the next frontier of innovating around wellness is sleep. Meaning, when we work with some brands who really want to take a stand and do something bold and sort of rise above the noise, and they really sort of commit to it, we commit to it, there's a ton of collaboration back and forth, it's really very fruitful, very productive. And so at times, you know, my hope is that you know, we can work with a brand and talk to them and work with them to get to a place where they really are taking quote unquote a calculated risk and doing something bold.
Do you, any of you, this is a little off topic, but I feel like I can do it. Do any of you find that there are geographical differences? So I find with my clients in different geographical regions, there's a different understanding of what content marketing is and what, I mean, the biggest pain point is there are a couple of regions where they basically treat it like long form advertising. And so it's like, you mentioned my name a little bit more, can you show only pictures of this and pretend like the iPhone doesn't exist, for example? No, I can't pretend the iPhone doesn't exist. But to me, that isn't actually sort of transparent or fruitful. It's not really useful to the user, but I'm wondering if you're finding either within your organizations or with your partners that there's some variance in there's nodding.
I mean, so, you know, I would say on the publishing side, there's a variance.
Yeah.
Right? So the things, the programs, and I'll get all excited about things we're able to do here, and then say, okay, let's try and do these in other markets and other geographies, and they aren't ready. They're not there.
Yeah.
So that's one limiter. Then on the flip side, you can go to those markets and you can actually pay for play. So here, we still do have our church and state, our black and white, even though with native we have 50 or more shades of gray that are in there now. But in some markets, I mean, it's just, you can just pay and get coverage and put whatever you want, and they're happy to take your money. So it is at very different places and stages on both the advertising side as well as in the publishing side, in my experience.
Yeah, I find the pay-for-play thing a little disconcerting. I mean, of course, from my vantage point, we don't do it, but I have had clients hand me programs that were pretty clearly that say, are you going to do this? And I'll say no, and we're clearly just not going to get the business. But I think it kind of goes back to Mary Gail's point of making sure that it's the right matchup, and we are not the right matchup for that. And I think that makes me feel good about what I do for a living. Let's talk a little bit about the data piece of this, because we talk a lot about, generally in marketing, about big data and all the data that you can collect on people and where they're going and what they're doing and how can I serve up more stuff to them and all that stuff. And that's a lot of data. But I'm interested if anybody on the panel uses data to drive content creation, and how you do that and what kinds of markers or pieces of data you look for.
Go ahead. We do. We probably don't have the data that Gail had, nor the traffic the New York Times site has, but yeah, we use data. We look at engagement numbers. And I would love to say it's a perfect science, and I would love to say that we're on it, but I would say, when I look broadly across what our team is responsible for, kind of the analytics and the data continues to be evolving. Because at the end of the day, I'm not selling anything right now, like our stuff is mostly reputation driven. But we do look at engagement, and we look at how many shares. We look at if they come to our website, how many pages. We look at how we will mark how much time they spend with our video. We look at what channels that it's on, and we use data to kind of help figure out what is resonating with the audiences out there, and we can get a ton of data on social. We use data to help us optimize our channel strategy. I would love to be able to use data, and I think it probably exists. We're just not leveraging it as effectively as I wish we were, to help us really understand how to maximize our content creation efforts so that we spend less time creating what we think is interesting and more time creating what is really valuable for our target audiences. And that's what we're moving, and we'd like to move towards. We are not there yet.
And so I echo what Amanda said, and I'll throw in something that we tried. We're always big into test, try, repeat, test, try, repeat. So last year's test was something, to your point about data fueling the content, was a program that we created with our media partner MEC with The Atlantic. And in this case, we did research with their audience, right, surveying their audience. We wanted to create this program called Working Better, and we let them drive. The audience told us what they were interested in and what they wanted to not talk about and hear about. So we created this program with them. All the content was fueled from that research. We'd never done it that way before. I'm happy to say we won with 2 different awards programs, the best native content. In one, it was a list of 5 brands. In the other, it was a list of 7. We were the only B2B brand that made the list of the best native content of the year. So that helped me get a little external validation that it worked, but it was a different approach for us that I was thrilled to try.
So can I just say, I know I was critical of publishers earlier in the conversation that we had on the phone, but I want to say that this is one of the biggest reasons for brands to work with publishers, because publishers and media platforms have access to so much more data to help understand the information needs of the audience, what they respond to. I actually had a chance to visit 6-7 years ago, so I can only imagine, maybe you can tell us the Huffington Post offices in a previous life. And I was in the media business at the time, and it was mind-blowing because at the time, the editorial team and the data analytics teams literally shared a desk. They were in the same room, there were screens everywhere, dashboards, and at any given time you could see what story was trending, what was getting clicked, and you could jockey and manipulate, the placement of the stories and so on based on that feedback in real time. And it was really a revelation about where the industry was going. And so I think brands have an opportunity to plug into that information source to really help inform their own content creation habits as well.
Mary Gail, I can only imagine how much data you guys use to.
Well, since that time, we actually, through AOL, there's a whole research team that looks at content segmentation by audience. So we have all the Huffington Post data that quite frankly, on some levels, is more qualitative. What headlines are doing well, what topics are trending. That's very much in the moment. But what we're doing now is starting to pair that with content goals, content needs, doing things like visual metaphor analysis, showing people images around certain topics and themes and seeing what resonates more. We do something called a max diff, where we'll pick a certain topic, what topics resonate the most, what topics resonate the least, and then there's an index from that. And based on that, we can show a brand or help them work through, in terms of developing a content strategy, what the on-ramp should be, what topics will be more appealing in the beginning and kind of show a progression toward that. But whenever I talk about data and insights, really, I really do think it's a tricky business in terms of content creation. Because we get a lot of brands or partners coming to us and saying, what do people want? Well, if we're showing them what people want in the moment, it's kind of over already. In other words, I really talk to my team and the brands about using these data and insights to inform their intuition, to inform their thinking, not to actually drive what the content is.
Because the best content, the best editorial is created from informed minds and great intuition, but doesn't actually say what to do, if you know what I mean. Like, I think that's the big mistake of data and content. It's that, you know, again, if you're using the data specifically to tell you what to do now, that's not going to be as interesting. So we really challenge the brands to say, okay, here's some data points, this is what it's telling us, but what are we going to do? How are we going to innovate? What are we going to create that's sort of taking it to the next level?
What I think is interesting though, and Tanya actually has a great line that I really like, where, so the whole insider baseball thing around native and advertising and what have you, there are actually, to your point, reasons to partner with publishers. And one of the big reasons is that there's not just data, but there's also an audience, and those things are linked. But the line in Ease once was the stage.
Well, there's a brand halo effect as well, right? And this is what I think when we, at the beginning, we're talking about the right fit between brands, right? I mean, I think of publishers today as not only having access to an audience and a lot of insights and information about that audience, but also offering a stage, right, on which you can present your content and share the information. And I think what I said is, like, not all stages are created equal.
Yeah, so
some stages are classier than others.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So you want to be test careful there.
But I think that the challenge is that in this current environment, as we're all figuring it out, we run the risk, and I think Barbara had kicked us off with this a little bit, that you can have a really classy stage, but if you kind of mess with it or let things fall apart, it becomes run down pretty quickly. Nobody wants to be there. And I think incumbent in this idea of the nice stage is like the right audience and then the right environment. And so I think one of the things that is concerning, especially to publishers, is that we have to figure out a way to deal with declining ad revenues, you know, this sort of the advent of pay-to-play, which is definitely a thing that exists at some publishers. You know, the challenge of native and how people are perceiving that and this sort of diminishment of trust in the brand. If we allow too much of that to happen to our brands, then we become a less nice stage for brands like yours to appear on. And so I'm kind of interested in getting your opinions on where you think something like, you know, native or content marketing is headed. What do you think are the best case scenarios for the people that you're trying to reach in the partners that you work with? Anybody wants to?
I mean, I don't know if this answers that, but at the end of the day, if someone said, you know, give me a sentence on what you're doing, right? We're in the value exchange business, right? I don't know if someone is going to walk away from engagement with Goldman Sachs content, wherever it lives, and come away thinking, that was really valuable. If that's going to be because they engage with a piece of content that helps explain what we do as a firm and how it's relevant to the general public. I don't know if they're going to derive value out of learning something interesting about a topic that they are interested in that we could have a valuable voice on. I don't know if that value is going to be derived by being inspired by one of our 10,000 women scholars or 10,000 small business scholars. I don't know how that value is derived. It may be through a cool infographic that helped explain the impact, the economic impact of certain industries based on how millennials spend money, right? So right now where we are is we're in the business of trying to create valuable experiences through illuminating the good things that Goldman contributes, right? Whether that's intellectual capital, or whether that's what we do through our core businesses. The only thing I can control, and I use the word control very carefully because nobody controls anything in the media landscape, is I need to make sure that we're creating value in that exchange, however it manifests itself. Then hopefully we're choosing the right partners, and you choose partners based on brand appropriateness, and there are certain brands there are certain publishers that just don't make sense to us as a brand. We don't make sense for that publisher's audience. So there's, there's common sense and brand appropriateness that play into what you say. And I think as long as folks on value and appropriateness and brand authenticity, I think you're okay. And what's right for my brand, by the way, may not be right for someone else, and that's what makes the world interesting, and we have different meaning.
To create value, though, you have to have a very clear point of view as to how you can bring value to something, right? And so I think thinking about the future of content marketing from both sides, a publisher and brand perspective, right? I think that's probably the most critical part of the path forward, is to be very clear, yes, I have permission to show up, I have a voice, but what does that voice stand for? And the brands, the media brands that are going to be successful and do well are the ones who are very clear about the answer to that question for themselves as well, right? When I read an Economist article written by editors, I am always very clear about, because that journalist tells me right up front at the beginning of the article what the point of view is that he brings to the story, right? And I would encourage publishers to think about how they do that. When I go to the Huffington Post, I know what kind of experience I'm going to have. Same with the Economist. And so as brands, I think we have a chance to be just as clear and upfront and transparent about our point of view as well. We don't have to be embarrassed about the fact that we're a brand, because we have permission to show up today, So just, as I say, go forth and be bold,
Yeah, I think one of the questions that comes up a lot, and I'll close on this, is that, is it enough to say it's clear, it's transparent, it's good quality content? And I think that this idea of value and POV, that's what makes that good enough. It starts to make those things make sense for us and our audiences. And on that note, I will open it up to questions. And I just have to, I can't tell where the microphone people are, but just so that you know, there'll be a delay in reading the questions, or in announcing the questions, because I have to wait for the live stream for the mic folks to get to the individual people. There's a question right here in the middle of the...
Great, hi. It's so wonderful to see some B2B brands up on the stage versus the typical B2C. So my question is for Goldman and Xerox. How are you taking your success in content marketing and linking that back up to the firm's overall KPIs and business objectives?
So I'll start. Everything needs to start from the North Star of what we're trying to do with the brand and the business, and those two should certainly be coalescing. And so everything that we are doing and building out through our whole marketing ecosystem and through paid, owned, and earned media in particular, we try to make sure everyone's got the same mantra and the same North Star. I think especially when it comes to something like content, you can have people going in all different trajectories, which is really dangerous for the brand, dangerous for sort of, again, positioning what you're trying to do against this commonality of where you want to take the business and the objectives that you have for it. So I'm happy to say we have a good discipline within the company where it does start at the top, it does trickle down, and everybody understands that, but it didn't start that way. So it's been an evolution through time.
Yeah, I will say, to no surprise, we needed to be more transparent as a B2B company. I think that we came at it from a different place, but I don't think we are any different from most B2B companies today with regards to broad communication goals. I think that, so my team is also responsible for positioning Goldman as an employer of choice, so we do recruitment marketing. Whether you're courting millennials and the next generation, which is Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Z.
There's so much Gen Z than I am, I have no.
You have to demonstrate. So we're courting them as an employer of choice, but we're also courting them for commercial opportunity, right? And so when you think about that, you have to be more transparent. We have to put out narratives, and when I say we, I think most B2Bs have to put narratives out there that we did not have to put out there before about what is our purpose, what is our broad societal value, how do we impact the communities in which we do business, how do we contribute, and 10 years ago, we didn't have to do that. I think every company needs to be doing that right now for both reasons, right? To position, in my case in particular, to position Goldman as an employer of choice to millennials, but also to position Goldman as a commercial entity in which millennials and others want to do business with. People want to know you. People want to understand you. People want to understand your motivations. People want to understand what you're doing. And you have to be out there. And so what we're doing from a content marketing perspective, and anything we do from, my team is the brand and content strategy team, it's towards those broad firm goals.
It was a really good question, though, because we did some research about a year and a half ago, and we have actually found that, broadly speaking, marketers claim that only 31% of them feel that their content strategy is well understood within their organization. So that socializing internally so that you can get some alignment is really key, because what ends up happening, and I'm sure we've all experienced this, is that you set up your content programs to do one thing, but they're measured internally by a totally different metric, and then lo and behold, you didn't succeed, and we lose our appetite for content marketing. So it is a really good question. Any other questions? I saw the same sort of grads markets, but if I can't actually tell, I don't think there are any. Well, thank you all very much. Good luck with the next panel. It's the one that stands between you and drinks, but I hope it's really awesome and you have a great evening. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.